Hey there, drowsy historian here tonight. We're headed somewhere quiet, not peaceful. Quiet, but the kind of silence that follows an explosion. The government swears didn't happen. You're not a nuclear physicist. You're not a firefighter or an engineer. You're just available, and in the Soviet Union of 1986, available is all it takes. A clipboard said you were fit to serve. And now here you are standing a few kilometers from a shattered reactor, wearing a canvas uniform and a badge that will lie to you about how close you are to dying. The air tastes wrong, the trees are shedding leaves in June, and the men next to you, the ones who know too much, won't stop vomiting. So before your boots start melting and your fingernails quietly detach, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what unspeakable hour this video found you. I always like to know who else is still awake while we tiptoe through these grim parts of history, and if you'd like early access to more softly spoken, existential crises, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. Now lie back. Breathe evenly and ignore that faint ringing in your ears. It's probably not neurological damage. Let's begin. You arrive by train, though no one tells you where you're going or where exactly you're stopping. The schedule is blank. The windows are fogged with ash and sweat. Someone in your unit says you're near Pryatt, but the name is whispered like a curse. You step off onto cracked concrete under a white sky that seems bleached rather than overcast. There's no welcoming party, no briefing, just an officer with a clipboard and a cigarette burned down to the filter, waving you forward like baggage on a conveyor belt. No one's wearing insignia, no one's smiling. You're told to stand in a line and wait, which, if nothing else is familiar, you stand there long enough to realize something is deeply wrong. The air feels heavy, not like humidity, but like you're breathing through gauze. It smells faintly of ozone and wet metal, like someone left the lights on in a swimming pool full of car batteries around you. Soldiers cough into their sleeves and try not to meet your eyes. No one talks, even the birds are absent. It's not just quiet here. It's sterile, sanitized, a place where sound used to be but has since been scrubbed away. You've never heard silence like this. It makes your bones feel hollow. Someone eventually hands you a form. It says something about temporary reassignment and vital infrastructure restoration. There's a stamp, some Cyrillic, and a signature that looks suspiciously like it was rubber stamped, while the searer was blackout drunk. There's no mention of radiation, no mention of reactors, just local containment operations, and a recommendation to avoid unnecessary contact with wild animals, standing water, and Western news broadcasts. You're given a canvas uniform, 2 sizes too large, and a pair of rubber boots that squelch when you walk. One man asks what exactly you're cleaning up. The officer says nothing to be concerned about. And that's the end of the discussion. The trucks come before the questions can. You're loaded in the back with a dozen others, mostly young, mostly silent. A few older men have the look of factory veterans or ex-soldiers who've seen things they'll never admit to. One of them mutters something about graphite. Another slaps his arm and says, "It's just bugs." There are no bugs. The truck engine is loud, but not loud enough to cover the dread. You pass fields where the wheat has turned gray, trees that seem to droop in odd directions like they're melting or mourning. A dog stands in the road and doesn't move as the truck barrels toward it. You close your eyes before the impact. You never hear it at the site. Your first impression is confusion. There's too much military for a power plant and not enough order for a military base. Tents have sprung up like fungal growths across the dirt. Gear counters click in the hands of people who refuse to explain what they're measuring. There's a constant haze in the air, not smoke, not fog, just a fine shimmer, like heat waves rising from pavement that's never cooled. Every surface is coated in a thin film of dust that you're told not to touch. You weren't planning to. You ask someone in a medic's vest what happened. He shrugs, wipes his face with a cloth and says, "It was a fire. That's all, a fire." But you've seen fires. Fires don't leave birds dead in the trees or paint burn marks onto the sky. Fires don't make your skin itch through your shirt. Someone else says it was a test that went wrong. Another says a turbine exploded. One man insists there was no explosion at all, just a leak, but none of them will look at the wreckage. No one even points in its direction. It's like there's a blind spot baked into everyone's vision, an unspoken agreement not to acknowledge the smoldering ruin in the middle of the compound. Eventually you're given your orders. They're printed on thin paper that's already curling at the edges, as though the ink can't stand to be here either. You're assigned to Zone 3 perimeter debris operations. You ask what that means. The officer grunts and says, "You'll find out." You're handed a shovel, it's not new. The handle is worn smooth, the metal chipped and darkened. You wonder how many people have used this before you, and whether any of them are still using shovels at all. No one offers a map. No one explains the boundaries. There's a vague gesture in the direction of the sarcophagus and the instruction to follow the markers. You ask what the markers look like. The officer doesn't answer. Behind you, a group of men in full protective gear walk past carrying a hose. Their boots leave dark prints in the dust like footprints on the moon. You wonder what it means that they're wearing gas masks. And you're not. By the end of your first hour, you've stopped asking questions. Not because you're satisfied, but because no one is listening. The place feels like a dream built out of warnings and lies. You try to hold on to the facts. You arrived with your name, your age, the town you left behind, but already they feel distant, like details from a movie. You have watched in another life. What matters now is simple. You're here, you're assigned, and you're not allowed to leave. The only truth anyone seems willing to offer is this: don't touch anything. You can't afford to bury the thing about radiation, is that you can't see it, smell it, or touch it, at least not in a way you'll recognize until it's far too late. That's what makes it such a charming companion out here. Unlike fire, it doesn't crackle. Unlike bullets, it doesn't whine past your ear. Radiation is pallidum in a way. It doesn't make a fuss. It simply arrives, sits down inside your body, and begins to rearrange you quietly, systematically, with the calm precision of someone who has all the time in the world. You're told very little about it, of course. They hand you a dompter, a chunky little badge that clicks occasionally and flashes numbers you've never been trained to interpret. You're told to keep it on you at all times, like it's a lucky charm or a passport to safety. What they don't mention is that many of the dosimeters don't work properly, and even the ones that do have a habit of maxing out without warning. When that happens, the reading just stops, flat lines. You might think that means the danger has passed. It hasn't. It means the danger has graduated beyond the device's ability to care. For reference, the average person picks up about 0.1 microverts of radiation from eating a banana. That's not a joke. Bananas contain naturally occurring potassium-40, and someone somewhere decided that was a good baseline for comfort. A chest X-ray, about 100 bananas. A whole body CT scan, 10,000. The rooftop you're heading toward, let's just say it's less a few bunches of bananas and more congratulations, you're now the banana. The core itself emitted doses high enough to kill in under a minute. That's not speculation, that's geometry. But you're not standing on the core. Thankfully, you're working around it, near it, next to it. That distinction is supposed to make you feel better. It doesn't, even at the distances you're allowed to be. Some surfaces are so radioactive that you'd absorb a year's worth of background radiation just by sitting on them for a lunch break. Not that you'll get one. Radiation doesn't respect your schedule. It doesn't care if it's break time. It doesn't care that you're 23, relatively healthy, and had plans to visit your cousin in Minsk next month. It just keeps leaking through walls, through clothing, through you. What radiation does inside the body depends on a few factors, none of which you control. There's the type of radiation: alpha, beta, gamma, neutron. There's the dose, how much, how fast, and then there's your body itself, your genes, your age, your bad luck. Once inside, it begins damaging cells like a drunk carpenter swinging a sledgehammer through drywall. It rips through DNA, tears apart cellular instructions, breaks the machinery that tells your body when to grow, when to stop, when to die. Sometimes your cells panic and shut down. Sometimes they mutate. Sometimes they just forget what they were supposed to do and start multiplying with all the grace of a spreadsheet on fire. Radiation doesn't kill you directly. Not usually. It sets off a chain reaction. It frays your immune system. It scars your lungs. It turns your gastrointestinal tract into a battlefield. Your body begins failing at all the little things you didn't know it was constantly doing right. You bruise easier, you can't heal from cuts, your gums swell, your bones ache, your stomach knots, and stays that way. It's not dramatic like the movies, it's just relentless, and worse, it's internal. You can't run from it because it's already behind your ribs, ticking. You might assume someone would tell you how to protect yourself, but most of the men around you are just as in the dark. Some were given short pamphlets printed in bulk, describing vague hygiene protocols and food safety tips. Don't touch exposed metal. Don't drink from open sources. Wear gloves even if they're too big. Others received nothing at all. You hear rumors that the officers got better gear, more detailed briefings, Higher quality dimes, but that's not your rank. And anyway, envy is a waste of energy when your white blood cell count is already doing its best impression of a sinking ship. There's something uniquely Soviet about the whole affair. A disaster, this vast, this complex, and this misunderstood, becomes an exercise in forced optimism. You're told not to worry. You're told to keep working. You're told the readings are within acceptable limits, a phrase so vague. It could apply to anything from soup temperature to reactor exposure, and you believe it because the alternative is worse. The alternative is accepting that you're being poisoned slowly by something that looks like nothing at all. Some men wear their dompters like talismans. They tap them nervously. They shake them as if that might make the numbers change. Others ignore theirs, completely stuffing them in pockets or leaving them in the barracks so they don't have to confront what they already suspect. It's easier to be afraid of something you can name. But radiation is a fog. It has no face. It doesn't growl in the bushes or crawl. Through vents, it simply is all around you all the time. Eventually, you learn to stop thinking about it. You accept the taste of copper in your mouth. You ignore the rash that won't fade. You chalk the fatigue up to bad sleep, the dizziness to dehydration. You get used to feeling worse in the morning than you did the night before. You stop asking how many sieverts it takes to kill a man and start asking how many a man can take before anyone notices he's dying. You stop fearing the exposure and start fearing the silence that follows it, because here no one tells you when you've had enough. They just stop calling your name at roll call. You're issued your equipment from the back of a faded truck that looks like it once carried potatoes and dignity, and has long since run out of both. The quartermaster doesn't speak, he gestures. You hold out your hands and receive what appears to be a uniform, though uniform is a generous term. It's more of a sack with sleeves. The fabric is coarse and stiff, smelling of damp storage and industrial soap. The trousers have a drawstring waist that doesn't work, and the jacket's buttons seem to have been sewn on by someone with a grudge against consistency. There's no label, no size if it fits, it's an accident. Your boots are made of rubber, the same kind used in dairy farms and flooded basements. They slosh when you walk, trapping sweat against your skin until your feet feel like boiled dumplings. The soles are thin, softening just enough to let you feel every rock shard and warped metal plate beneath you. There's a faint chemical odor baked into them, something between disinfectant and rubber cement. And after an hour of wearing them, you can't tell if it's coming from the boots or from your skin. Then there's the mask. It's a surgical mask in theory, a thin rectangle of gauze with ear loops that dig into your skin, and a wire that's supposed to pinch over your nose but doesn't. It hangs damp against your mouth after 10 minutes, trapping your breath and sweat and doing absolutely nothing to stop microscopic radioactive particles from sliding straight through. You see others using scarves, handkerchiefs, even t-shirts wrapped 3 times around their face. It's theater, a ritual, something to convince yourself you're doing something useful. You could wear a screen door on your face and get the same level of protection, but at least the screen door might offer better airflow. Gloves are another highlight. You're lucky if they're rubber. Most are a brittle polymer that cracks along the fingers within a day. Some are clearly reused, stained at the fingertips, patched with tape, or marked with initials from a previous owner who may or may not still have hands. They're handed out by size, which is to say indiscriminately. You watch one man wrap bandages around his wrists just to keep them from sliding off. They don't keep out moisture. They barely keep out the wind, but they're required, so you wear them even when they turn your palms into blisters for those deemed important enough or unlucky enough. There's the lead apron. It's exactly what it sounds like. A heavy, awkward slab of lead-embedded cloth that hangs over your chest like a radiation-themed bib. It protects against some gamma exposure in theory, but only the front of your torso, and only if you're standing perfectly still facing the threat, which you won't be ever. It weighs too much, shifts constantly, and causes an immediate and relentless sweat that soaks your clothes and leaves salt stains across your collar. Some men ditch it the first chance they get. Others cling to it like superstition. One man ties his with wire to keep it from falling off another, tapes his shut with old gauze, and hope the helmet is perhaps the most laughable item. It's standard issue. Military surplus, a leftover from when wars were fought with bullets instead of isotopes. It offers excellent protection from low ceilings, falling debris, and the occasional frustrated superior it offers. Absolutely none from the invisible energy currently crawling across your skin and into your bloodstream. But it completes the look, makes you feel official. You clench your jaw and wear it anyway, because otherwise you look like exactly what you are, an under-equipped man in a nightmare. He doesn't understand. You learn quickly that this gear wasn't made for comfort or survival. Even sanity, it was made to meet a checklist. It exists so that someone somewhere can write adequate protection. Distributed on a report, you know this the first time you have to strip it off. The inside of your jacket is soaked. Your socks are wrung out like sponges. Your undershirt has formed a second skin of salt and grime. You stink. Not just of sweat, but of metal and chemicals and something else, something sour and unfamiliar like mold crossed with electricity. Changing becomes a ritual. Not of cleanliness, but of damage assessment. You peel off each layer, slowly inspecting the rash on your forearm, the welts along your hips where the waistband chafed you. Rotate your boots to avoid new blisters forming on top of old ones. You scratch at your neck until it bleeds, then wrap it with a strip of torn towel. You're not alone in this. Every man you see is red-eyed, raw-skinned, hunched slightly forward like his clothes are slowly eating him alive. You hear rumors of better gear, sealed suits, proper respirators, thick gloves that don't fall apart like pastry dough. But those are reserved for the reactor core teams, or so they say. Some believe the gear exists only in propaganda films. Others insist they've seen the real thing, worn by men who never take their helmets off and never speak to anyone else. Either way, you won't be getting any of. And not here, not in your zone. After a few days, the gear stops feeling like something you put on it. Starts feeling like part of you, a second worse skin. You don't notice the stench anymore. You stop complaining about the itch. You grow used to the sense that your clothes are quietly failing at their one job. Protection becomes less of a concept, and fast within hours their skin reened and began to swell. Their eyes burned, their throats closed. They vomited in the trucks on the way back to the station, thinking it was smoke inhalation or nerves. It wasn't. Their bodies had started to break down. From the inside, cells dividing without instruction. DNA unraveling like frayed rope by morning. Several were already unconscious. By the end of the day, they were in the hospital, not the local clinic, Moscow. The best the Soviet Union could offer, but by then even the best wasn't enough. The stories trickled down to your camp, quiet. At first, then louder. The man who touched the graphite. His hand turned black within hours. Another lost patches of skin with his uniform, as if the fabric had fused. To him, one of them had his tongue swell until it cracked and bled every time he tried to speak. You weren't supposed to know any of this. Of course, the official line was that the firemen were recovering well. But the men who came back from the city told different stories. Whispers of swelling faces, of teeth falling out of skin, sloughing off in wet sheets like old wallpaper. They died slowly. Not all at once, and not with the clarity you might expect. Some lingered for weeks. Morphine helped at first, then it didn't. Their bodies stopped producing blood cells. Their organs liquefied one by one. Infections took hold that no antibiotics could stop. The nurses wore double gloves and face shields. But it didn't matter. The radiation was inside. The patients, now it seeped out through breath, sweat, touch. Their hospital rooms became sealed chambers when they died. They were wrapped in plastic and buried in coffins lined with sinks sealed under concrete. Their uniforms were too radioactive to burn. Some were buried in lead-lined graves before their families were even informed back at camp. Their names started to circulate like folklore, not as cautionary tales but as legends. They were called heroes, saints of the reactor. Their portraits appeared in state newspapers, airbrushed and expressionless, framed by patriotic slogans and red banners. You saw them on posters, young faces in dress uniforms staring out with the blank pride of someone drafted into myth. You didn't know their real names, only the nicknames and stories, half true, half invented, all repeated with the hushed reverence reserved for martyrs and lost causes. You don't feel like one of them. You came later, after the worst of the chaos had passed. You had more information, even if it was filtered through layers of euphemism and denial. You had a dosimeter for whatever that was worth. You were told not to touch certain materials, not to stand in one place for too long, to watch for signs of exposure. The firemen had none of that. They walked into hell thinking it was a job like any other, you know. Now it wasn't, and yet the difference feels paper thin. You might have more data, more stories, more rumors to guide you. But you're still guessing, still hoping. You didn't stand too close, didn't inhale too deeply, Didn't spend 1 minute too long and under the wrong wind, the firemen became symbols because they died visibly, quickly, horrifically. You're not sure what you'll become. A number in a registry, a case study, a rumor of someone who left Chernobyl and never quite recovered. Sometimes you wonder if they were the lucky ones they didn't have to live with. The uncertainty, the slow degradation, the quiet rot that starts in the marrow and works its way out. They didn't wake up 3 years later with a cough that won't go away, or a numbness that creeps up one side of the body and refuses to explain itself. They didn't bury their own teeth in the waste bin and pretend not to notice they died knowing they had done their duty. You're still waiting to find out what yours will cost. Their sacrifice is praised over and over again by men who never met them and by officials who wrote the orders that sent them in blind. Every time you hear the word hero, it tastes bitter, not because they weren't brave, but because bravery didn't matter. They were doomed the moment they stepped off the truck. All that followed was noise and pain. Their stories may be remembered, but the lesson is always softened. The footage is grainy. The names are mispronounced. The uniforms look clean in the documentaries, you know. Better you saw what radiation does, you still see it every day in the eyes of the men around you and the cracks of your own skin. The firemen weren't the beginning or the end, they were just the first to arrive, and you, whether you admit it or not, are following in their footsteps. At first it's easy to ignore. You wake up groggy and chalk it up to bad sleep. You're not in your own bed. You're on a cot that sags in the middle and smells faintly of mildew and antiseptic. The tent walls flap in the wind. A man 2 bunks over snores like a tractor with a bad belt. Of course you feel tired. Everyone feels tired. You roll your shoulders, crack your neck, and convince yourself it'll pass. Then there's the taste. It arrives slowly like an afterthought. You notice it one morning after a shift clearing debris. Something metallic sharp like a coin pressed against your tongue. You drink water, chew gum, try rinsing your mouth with iodine. Nothing helps. The taste isn't on your tongue, it's in your blood. You don't know that yet, but part of you suspects it. The sensation is wrong in a way you can't quite describe. It doesn't fade, it just lingers as if something deep inside you has started to rust. The nausea comes next. Subtle at first, a little queasy after meals, then it's more frequent. You bend over to tie your boots and the room tilts slightly. You stand up too fast and your stomach flips. Your appetite disappears. The canteen food wasn't good to begin with. Lukewarm stews, stale bread, boiled cabbage that smells like old socks. But now even the sight of it makes your throat tighten. You start skipping meals. You tell people it's nothing. They nod. They say the same. Fatigue settles into your body like wet cement. It's not just tiredness, it's heaviness. You move like every joint is carrying its own private hangover. Climbing stairs feels like a personal insult. You forget what it was like to wake up and not feel sore. You try to power through it, drink more water, take longer showers, do stretches like some of the older men suggest. It doesn't help. The exhaustion is not in your muscles, it's in your marrow. Your gums start bleeding next. Not dramatically, just enough to stain your toothbrush pink and make apples taste like pennies. You bite into bread and feel a sharp sting as something loosens along the gum line. Few days later, a mirror begins to ache for no reason. Then it stops. That worries you. More pain means something's alive. Silence means something gave up. The rash on your neck spreads. It starts as a dry patch, irritated red, easy to dismiss. You assume it's from your collar, or maybe the rough towel you used that morning, but it doesn't go away. It crawls slowly down your chest and behind your ears. The skin becomes thin, shiny. You scratch at it absent-mindedly until it breaks. Then curse when your fingertips come away damp with blood. You wrap a cloth around it and tell yourself it's just a reaction to the soap. You try to talk to a medic. She asks about your symptoms with practiced calm, makes a note on a clipboard and hands you aspirin. You ask if this is normal. She says, some men adjust better than others. She tells you to rest more. You ask if you should be removed from duty. She doesn't answer. You realize she isn't authorized to you. Thank her anyway. What else can you do? Around you, the same things are happening to other men. You see them rubbing their eyes, roar, flinching at stomach cramps, struggling to keep down meals. No one talks about it. You learn to interpret the signs. Who's limping more than they were yesterday? Who's missing from roll call? Who stopped speaking entirely? You notice that the men who sweat the most stop sweating altogether. The ones who cough don't stop. The ones who vomit do it quietly behind tents with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggests it's become a daily routine when you mention your symptoms. To a superior, he raises an eyebrow and asks if you're looking for an excuse to leave. You say, "No, of course not." He nods. "It's probably nerves." He says, "The body plays tricks under stress." Then he claps you on the shoulder and tells you to toughen up. So you stop reporting symptoms. You start measuring them in silence. You learn what you can work. Through what you can hide. What you can laugh off in front of the others. Your sense of normal bends to accommodate the abnormal. You still taste metal. But you tell yourself, it's the water pipes. You still wake up drenched in sweat. But you blame the summer heat. You still forget what day it is, but so does everyone else. Eventually, you stop waiting for the whistle to blow. You grab another fragment. This one flakes in your hand and the dust clings to your glove like ash. There's a crackle in your ears now. Maybe it's the Geiger counter. Maybe it's your hearing starting to fail. Your vision has narrowed. Like you're looking through a tube. You feel your heart pounding so hard that your ribs hurt. Then finally you hear the whistle. The first long blast followed by two short ones. You drop the shovel without thinking and run. The way back is harder. Your limbs don't feel like yours. Your legs move but sluggishly, like they're wrapped in wet wool. You stumble. Once more, catch yourself and push forward. The metal staircase looms up at you like a threat. You take the steps badly unbalanced, half leaping, half falling. You reach the bottom. Someone grabs your arm and steadies you. You want to thank them, but your tongue doesn't work. You're pulled to the side and handed a bottle of water. It tastes like iron and mold. You swallow it anyway. Your hands are shaking so hard, you can't hold the bottle steady. Your face is pale, your breath won't slow down. A medic appears, shines a light in your eyes, says something you don't register. You nod anyway. Someone pats your shoulder and tells you, "Good work." You don't respond. Your shift lasted 91 seconds. 1 second over. The officer scribbles something on his clipboard and says nothing. You're told to rest, to sit in the shade, to eat something. You do. None of those things. You stare at your gloves. They're torn. The tips of your fingers are red and blistered. Your uniform is scorched at the knees. You feel like you've been microwaved from the inside out. Somewhere inside you, something essential has shifted. You don't know what it is yet. But you know, it won't be coming back. You're not alone out here. There are thousands of others, some in uniform, some in overalls, some in lab coats stained with things they no longer try to wash out. They arrive in buses, on foot, by train, carrying duffel bags, toolboxes, folded documents, and the same expression you've come to recognize in every mirror. Cautious determination wrapped in quiet dread. No one says what they're really thinking, but you see it in their eyes. Everyone is calculating, how long will I be here? How much can I take? How much is this worth? The man in the bunk next to yours is 22. A conscript from Belarus who was told this counted as military service. He brought a deck of cards and Asmal book of poetry, neither of which he's touched since. Arriving, he spends most nights sitting upright, picking at the edge of his blanket and whispering numbers to himself. Maybe days, maybe severs. He says he'll get a certificate and a bonus when this is over, enough to buy a car, maybe even an apartment. He says it like a prayer, a superstition passed down from men who didn't come home. Then there's the miner from Detsk, older than the rest, broad-shouldered and always smoking. He says this isn't the worst job he's ever had, which is somehow both comforting and horrifying. He volunteered. At least that's the word he uses. He was told they needed men to dig a tunnel beneath the reactor to install a cooling slab. And when he asked if it was dangerous, the recruiter laughed and said, "Everything's dangerous." Now his hands shake when he drinks and his teeth are turning black, but he keeps digging one bucket at a time, muttering that the earth is cleaner than the air. Up here, you meet a medic who never takes off her gloves. She wears 2 pairs at a time, changes them 3 times a shift, and still keeps a bottle of iodine in her breast pocket, like it's holy water. Her eyes are always red, though she claims it's just the dust. You see her sit with dying men and take notes while their skin peels away. She never flinches. She just writes and nods and presses her lips into a line so thin it looks like it might disappear altogether. She says she's documenting everything for a report. You don't ask who the report is for. Some of the men laugh, not often, and not joyfully, but there's a sharp, bitter edge to the way they joke. They call themselves the glowing boys, okay? Or the half livives, they name their squads after chemicals and curse, like they're trying to drive the poison back out through their lungs. You hear one man shout, "I bet I'll be sterile by next week." And the laughter that follows isn't laughter at all, it's a kind of collective exorcism. If you can name the fear muck and throw it back in the reactor's face, maybe it can't get to you. At least not right away. Others stay quiet. Entire units of young men move like ghosts, heads down, faces drawn. You see them shoveling debris, scrubbing trucks, building fences around fields that no one will ever walk through again. They don't talk about the work. They don't speculate about the long-term effects. They're just trying to get through the day. You ask one man why he came here and he shrugs. "I didn't know what it was," he says. "And now I do not." Everyone was tricked. Some knew exactly what they were walking into. They came anyway. Maybe out of loyalty. Maybe guilt, maybe because they believed it was better to die doing something that mattered than to live. Knowing they did nothing, you meet a former firefighter who came back even after being hospitalized in the early days. He still has burns on his arms and a tremor in his hands. When you ask him why, he says, "Someone has to." Then he takes another drag from a cigarette and walks into the smoke without hesitation. And then there are the ones who pretend it's not happening. Denial is a survival strategy. A popular one. You see men ignore symptoms, nosebleeds, nausea, sudden fatigue, as if admitting them makes them real. A man collapses during latrine duty and insists he just skipped breakfast. Another vomits behind the tents every morning and says, "It's the food." No one corrects them. You start doing the same. You stop counting headaches. You don't mention the rash on your leg or the sharp pain in your gut. It's better that way. More manageable, less real. You begin to understand that everyone here has made a kind of private bargain for some. It's money for others. Pride a few are clinging to vague promises of reward or recognition. But most are just trying to survive long enough to leave. There's no single reason anyone ends up here. Only layers of pressure, illusion, desperation, and force. You're all moving through the same poisoned air, working in the shadow of the same silent horror, each man carrying a slightly different story about how it came to this. At night, the camp smells of sweat smoke and industrial soap. The tents cack when the wind rises. Someone coughs endlessly in the distance. You lie awake listening to it and wonder if he'll be there in the morning. You wonder if you will. There's no heroism here. Not really, no speeches, no music. Just people doing what they were told or what they had to, or what they couldn't avoid. And one by one they're breaking quietly, steadily, invisibly. Not with a scream, but with a shuffle. A slump, a sigh. By the time you arrived, the fire was out. Not the danger, just the flames. What you stepped into was the aftermath, the slow-motion collapse. But others came before you in the hours when the smoke still curled black into the sky and the sirens hadn't stopped screaming. They were the first responders the firemen from Pryatt summoned in the dead of night with no information, no warning, and no gear suitable for the kind of disaster that awaited them. Most of them didn't even know it was a nuclear facility. They were told there was a fire on the roof, a standard electrical blaze, something manageable. They arrived in ordinary trucks, the kind used for house fires and traffic accidents. They wore standard uniforms, canvas jackets, steel helmets, rubber gloves. Some didn't even bother with masks. What was the point? No one told them what had happened. They ran hoses up to the roof and sprayed water onto a radioactive inferno, oblivious to the invisible fallout swirling in the air around them. Some of them handled pieces of graphite with their bare hands, brushing the glowing chunks aside like ordinary rubble. One man later said it felt warm, like a hot stone from a fireplace. He didn't realize he'd already absorbed a lethal dose. The effects came. You know your time is running out. Whether someone's counting it or not, your skin is paler, your muscles weaker, you move slower than you used to. Your hands shake when you try to thread your bootlaces, but you keep showing up. You keep working because what's the alternative? Sitting still waiting to get worse? Pretending you're not already on a clock that no one can see? You start to understand that radiation doesn't kill you in a dramatic wave. It wears you down, molecule by molecule, like a tide. Slowly pulling the beach out from under your feet. One day you'll take off your shirt and find a bruise that wasn't there the night before. You'll look in the mirror and see a stranger. You'll forget a name you've known for years, and by then it'll Be too late to change course, so you keep moving, you keep lifting, you keep digging. You stop wondering when the sickness will arrive because it already has. It just hasn't decided how loud it wants to be yet. You don't go to the hospital right away. Almost no one does. The men who do are the ones who can't stand, who wake up soaked in their own sweat and forget where they are, who pass out mid-task and wake up only long enough to vomit into a bucket. You tell yourself you're not there yet. You can still walk. You can still lift a shovel. You can still pretend that the ringing in your ears is just dehydration and not something unraveling deep in your nervous system. Besides, you've heard things about the hospitals. None of them reassuring when you finally get sent in. It's not because you ask to go, it's because someone else notices. A medic sees your hands shaking too much to hold a canteen. A supervisor watches you fumble your gear 3 times in a row and decides you're no longer useful. They load you onto a transport truck with 4 other men, none of whom speak. You don't know where you're going. You don't ask. Everyone has stopped asking. The hospital is a converted school building on the outskirts of the zone, stripped of desks and filled with rows of metal CS, most of them occupied. The walls still have faded chalkboard outlines and alphabet posters curling from the corners. You think of classrooms of childhood, and then immediately wish you hadn't. The air smells like bleach and spoiled meat. The fluorescent lights flicker so often you're not sure whether your vision is failing or the wiring is. You're told to sit down and wait. So you do. The waiting area is already full. Some men are doubled over. Others sit, very still, staring ahead at nothing in particular. One is humming to himself, a low, tuneless sound that's more unsettling than soothing. A nurse walks past with a tray of syringes. Another pushes a cart loaded with gauze, scissors, bandages already soaked with something brown. There are no charts. No names being called, no clear sense of order, just a room slowly filling with men who don't know whether they're getting better or worse. Eventually a doctor appears. He's in his 30s, maybe younger. It's hard to tell. His coat is stained and unbuttoned, and he carries a clipboard like it might decide to leave on its own if he lets go. He glances at you, checks a form, and nods toward an empty cot. You sit, he asks. Questions. Are you vomiting? Can you stand unaided? Do you have lesions? You nod to some, shake your head to others. He writes things down. You don't recognize the words, but you do recognize the speed. He's moving quickly because there are too many of you and not enough of him. They take blood, they weigh you. They measure your pulse and your temperature and your blood pressure. But the numbers don't seem to matter. No one comments on them. No one explains what's happening. You ask if you'll be kept overnight. The doctor says, maybe, which means yes, but not because it will help. There's just nowhere else to put you in the room next to yours. Someone is screaming, not constantly, just in intervals, as if the pain arrives in waves. You try not to listen. You try not to think about what's happening behind the sheet-hated doorway across from you. A man begins coughing up something black. A nurse rushes over with a towel. She doesn't look surprised. She just folds the towel when he's done and takes it away without speaking. You see a man from your own unit, Yuri. You think his name was lying on a cot 2 beds down. His skin is yellow and shiny, stretched too tight across his face. He doesn't blink. You think he might be dead. But then his lips twitch slightly. You don't speak. To him, he wouldn't recognize you anyway. The machines don't work. The X-ray is broken. The Dompter is shared between 3 rooms and only works if someone smacks it on the side. First, there are too few IV poles, so some bags hang from coat hooks or are taped directly to the bed frames. The power flickers once the lights go out entirely, and you lie there in the dark for 10 full minutes listening to the distant hum of generators and wondering if the nurses will come back. No one tells you what you have. You aren't given a diagnosis, only a bed. The doctor says radiation sickness once in a low voice and then moves on. The term means nothing to you now. It's too vague. It could mean vomiting for a week. It could mean dying in your sleep. Either way, it doesn't change what happens next. After 3 days, you're told you're stable enough to return to duty. You aren't. But they need the bed. You still can't keep food down. You've lost weight. You have a cough now, deep and wet, that makes your ribs ache every time it hits, but you stand and you dress and you nod when they hand you your papers. The nurse says you've recovered. You don't laugh, but it's a close thing back at camp. No one asks what it was like. They can already see it on your face. You walk slower. You speak less. You flinch when someone touches your arm. The others pretend not to notice. They don't want to know. You didn't go to a hospital. You went to a holding pen for men who couldn't be ignored any longer. Now you're back, and you're useful again. That's all anyone needs to hear. You stop thinking of the hospital as a place of healing. It's not. It's a filtration system. It identifies who can still function and who's already too far gone. It separates the broken from the completely broken. It doesn't fix you, it just decides whether to send you home, send you back, or start writing. Your name on a list no one will ever admit exists somewhere. There's a file with your name on it. It contains your assignment, your vitals, your radiation exposure, and a handful of observations written by someone who never made eye contact with you. You've never seen the file. Of course you're not supposed to, but you're told it exists. And like everything here, you're expected to trust that it's accurate, complete, and stored with the seriousness your service deserves you. Learn quickly that none of that is true. At first the numbers don't make sense. Your decimeter read high, dangerously high, before it stopped functioning altogether. The medic who checked you off after your rooftop shift made a note. You're sure of it? You remember the way she frowned when reading your form, the way she muttered under her breath. But later, when you're handed a copy of your exposure record for reassignment, the dose is lower, significantly lower, so low it makes you wonder if you hallucinated the entire rooftop experience. You didn't. The lie just fit better on paper. You're not alone in this. Men who collapsed during shifts returned to duty the next week with documents that describe their symptoms as mild fatigue. One man who vomited blood for 2 days is told he likely had a stomach virus. Another who passed out while carrying a contaminated hose is listed as having suffered from heat exhaustion. You begin to understand that the records don't reflect reality. They reflect what someone has decided reality needs to look like: cleaner, quieter, less damning. Doctors are under pressure. You see it in their faces, in the way they pause before writing anything down, in the sideways glances they give each other when someone asks about official diagnosis. You hear rumors that charts have been confiscated, rewritten, corrected. One nurse tells you she was instructed not to use the term radiation poisoning on any form submitted to higher command. Instead, she writes stress-related complications or chemical exposure. Everyone knows it's a lie, but the lie has momentum. It's already halfway to Moscow before the truth gets out of bed. And then there are the men who disappear, not into the zone, out of it. You hear about them in passing. Someone in your unit misses morning roll call. Someone else says he was sent to a hospital in Kiev, or maybe Minsk a few weeks later. No one's heard anything more. His belongings are quietly removed. His name isn't mentioned again later. You hear someone refer to him as transferred. No one believes it, but no one questions it either. To question it would mean drawing attention, and drawing attention is dangerous. You see the posters going up in the village square. Smiling liquidators in crisp uniforms, medals pinned neatly to their chests, hands shaking with party officials beneath, bright red banners. The men in the photos look proud, clean, healthy. You know those faces. One of them didn't have eyebrows anymore. The last time you saw him, another couldn't walk. The photo must have been old or staged or taken before his legs began to buckle under him. Either way, the version of him on the poster is a fiction immortalized in propaganda, too perfect to ever have been real. The official newspapers run stories about how the situation is under control. They print charts with the recovery timelines and articles praising the strength of Soviet industry. They mention